Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. It's good to see everyone here and to know there are probably people online watching. It's very encouraging. There was a point I thought that there might be only a couple of us here this evening, but where two or more gathered in his name, he's there, so I feel good about this. There you go. There you go. All right. Well, we've been studying the book of Ephesians for the last several weeks, and we've gotten through to about the middle of chapter 5, and we notice that in the structure of Ephesians, the first three chapters, the first half of the letter, are about doctrine, basically. What should we know? What should we believe? And then Paul shifts over to basically, what is it, now that you know all this, what should we do with it? How do we apply it to our lives? How should it look in our lives to the world or to people around us? And so for chapter 4 and for chapter 5 especially, he talks about different walks that we're supposed to do, to walk in love and to walk in light. And we just finished the section that talks about walking in wisdom. And before we get into tonight, I thought the last couple of verses before that, verses 20 and 21, we were sort of scooted through at the very last Wednesday. So I want to go over them just very quickly again. The verses 20 and 21 say, "Giving thanks always for all things to God, the Father, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God." And the question I asked, and we kind of rushed through this, but in verse 21, why is it important to give thanks always for all things? Why do we do that? I mean, why give thanks? Yes.
God gives us everything for life and godliness, so we need to follow that.
Okay, God gives us everything we need for life and godliness. That's a very important belief, that if he gives those things to us, we should be thankful for them, even though we may not understand them at the time. Certainly, in this life, bad things happen, or unfortunate things happen. But we don't always understand why they happened. And to understand, though, that God is in charge, he knows better than us, and he has a plan, allows us to be able to give thanks even when in situations that may not be that friendly, or may not be that what we see as good. And that's an important thing that we as Christians have to believe. And it helps us to understand that where we are compared to God. God knows everything. He's omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. So he knows everything, and he's able to do anything. And to just be able to trust in him, that allows us to move on and to give thanks for the things that happen to him. So that's an important concept that I think we need to make a general principle in our lives, just being able to give thanks in all circumstances. And then in verse 21, submitting to one another in the fear of God. So the question I asked, the very last question, was why should our fear of God or Christ lead us to submit or to be subject to one another?
Because we know what the alternative is.
Okay, we know what the alternative is. It might be interesting to understand that the word fear of God, and you read this and your first reaction probably is, "Woo, scary! God's so great and I'm so small and he could smush me." But the Greek word is phobos, which I looked up in Vines. It basically refers to a reverential kind of fear, a respect of somebody so awesome that it's not just a matter of being scared of what he can do, but, well, let's see, their definition was not a mere fear of his power and righteous retribution, but a wholesome dread of displeasing him. The idea that we're trying to serve God, and our fear isn't necessarily in him himself, it's just the fear of not doing what we could because we love him so much. We want to serve him as best we can. A fear that banishes that terror, that shrinks from his presence. and which influences the disposition and the attitude of the circumstances to be able to guide by trust in God. Just the idea that, that we fear God, that kind of fear, because we fear God, we don't want to fail Him. We want to submit to one another. And that puts another shade of meaning into, how we get along with each other, because we don't want to fear God, we don't want to disappoint God through our actions. We understand that we are, as human beings, will sometimes do that. Okay, we're not perfect. But it's not something that we want. We want to please God. Yeah, I think we want to. That's one of the reasons we all became Christians. We want to serve Christ. We want to please God. We want to do what's right. So that should lead us to, to submit, to be in subjection to one another. The idea of humbling yourself and putting other people first. That's kind of what agape love is all about. It's the kind of love that shows that you care about other people and are willing to put them before you put your own self, basically your own self. So the reason I bring that out is because it's going to directly affect what we're going to read tonight, because we're going to look at 3 particular relationships or situations that talk about this idea of submitting to one another and the importance that is. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. So let's go ahead and continue on, and we'll finish up chapter 5. Mike, could I get you to read all the way from 22 to 33?
The rest of the chapter.
Right. Chapter 5, verses 22 through 33.
Chapter 5, from verse 22. Marriage, Christ and the church. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his flesh, or joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Okay, thank you for that. Before we jump into this, and I'm sure everyone's going to have a lot to say, but keep in mind that one of the keys to understanding this whole passage is Paul's talking in verse 32. He says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So understand also that he's talking about, these relationships compared to the relationship between Jesus and the church. So we shouldn't add more or take away anything else from that understanding. But Paul's talking about the relationship between the members of the church and Christ, the body in Christ. But let's go ahead and start in verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as to the Lord's. Now, before I go any further, are there any other translations of that? Submit yourselves to your own husbands. Submit to your own husbands as to the Lord.
And one of the versions says yield.
Yield, okay. I think one of the other versions says be in subjection to. Okay, I'm just doing this because I want us to make sure we understand what the action is going on here, what it means to submit. Does it mean to walk around with having your arm behind your back, being told what you have to do, having your arm twisted? Does it mean bowing down before a person and begging them to know what to do, just trying to do? There's a lot of images that people attach to this, and I want to make sure that we're talking all on the right level and about this, because what does it mean to be in subjection to? Or what does it mean to submit to? Okay. From what I've read and from what I've seen, the idea of submitting, the idea of showing love and respect and reverence for this other one person to another person is a way to show submission. I guess that's the word you would use. Mike, did you raise your hand?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. As the idea that a woman is showing this love and respect to her own husband as far as she can without violating the prior and the higher command to obey God. The idea that just as much as her husband, she submits to the Lord above him. The idea and the idea that when all other motives fail, when you're dealing with your husband, remember that you're doing it for the Lord. The idea that there's sometimes. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so the other caveat is hopefully the husband is subject to the Lord as well. He's following the Lord. Right. Realizing that your husband is subject. Your boss has a boss. That kind of puts it in another way. But the idea that the husband is just as much in subjection to God. So when all other motives fail, remember that you're doing it for the Lord. That can be very useful when you're trying to. And I'm sure this happens a lot that wives, when they reach that point, they have to just remember, oh, okay, if nothing else, I remember I'm doing this for the Lord, and this is part of my service to God. And so that can help in a lot of different areas, in a lot of different ways. The idea that what you do for your husband, you're doing also as service to God. So, verse 23 says, "For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of church. He is the Savior of the body." That's interesting. So how does Christ's headship of the church relate to the relationship between husband and wife? What does the head of the church do, or what did Christ do? That might give us some insight.
He was leading hordes of people.
Okay.
Leader.
He's a leader, definitely. The head, that's what the head does. He guides. He's hopefully an example, a role model. He's hopefully a leader, the head that gives of himself. I mean, obviously Christ gave everything so that we could become the church. He died for us. So it's a kind of a sacrificial kind of a relationship. The leader is willing to give for the body as well.
And as an example?
As an example, too. Very good. The idea that, so much of what we try to do is imitate Christ. So he serves as our role model, example, our leader. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so that wives be to their own husbands in everything. So just going over that idea again, that just the same relationship that we have as Christ can be seen in the marriage relationship. But I think after I read just these 3 verses, my question was, why is the marriage relationship so similar to Christ's relationship with the church? There's a really good question.
Because it's ordained by God.
Okay, it's ordained by God. That's one good reason. What makes a marriage relationship different from, say, the relationship between parents and children, or boss and worker?
Well, they don't want to do.
Okay.
They don't want to do what's required.
Okay. A marriage is voluntary, isn't it? Both sides come to the point where they agree to become one. They agree to be joined together. Just as we came to that point, well, just as God offered that, he was ready to provide us a way to come to him. That was through Christ. And he's making this offering, and every person has the choice whether they want to choose to volunteer to take God up on his offer, to take Christ up on his offer, to be saved, to be part of the church. It isn't where no one is being forced into the church, like no one should be forced into marriage or feel that they're forced to marry. It's all, in the end, it comes down to both parties saying, I do, or I will. You know, that's what makes this easy for Paul, or I think to describe this relationship, is the fact that if both sides make that commitment, that voluntary commitment to be part of this relationship, then they have to abide in that relationship. They have to find some way to do that, and part of that is what Paul's talking about, through submitting to one another. Because just as much as the wife submits to the husband has to, well, we're going to find out what the husband does in the next few verses, but it's going to be along the same lines. There are things that a husband has to do. What are you going to say?
So in a team or in a marriage, all trying to pull in the same direction, find unity, follow God. Right.
Hopefully they have that's the goal, right? You have that commitment to one another, that same far off goal to come to God. Now let's look at the second portion, verses 25 through 28. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. This idea, the word love that he's talking about isn't surprisingly, he's not using the eros kind of love, the romantic kind of love. He's talking about agape love, just as Christ loved the church. And that kind of love is sacrificial, the kind that puts the other person before themselves. So in a way, he's just told the wives they have to submit themselves to their husbands. Now he's telling the husbands that they have to love their wives in that sacrificial way, so that they give themselves to the wives, that they sacrifice themselves. They put the other person first. Now, the reason for that is in verses 26 and 27. Now, keep in mind, he's talking about Christ and the church here. That he might sanctify her and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. What does sanctify mean?
Set apart.
Okay, set apart. Okay, set apart. So that means if I'm married to Celia, she is sanctified to me. She belongs. She can't be husband to anyone else because she's my. Yeah, I know, darn it. But that's sanctified. It's built. That relationship is built so that it can't be changed normally. So, but it's interesting. He says, what Christ says. He sanctified the church. He cleansed her with the washing of water by the word. Now we understand what the washing of the water by the word is: baptism, right? Okay. So that was the purpose behind Jesus' sacrifice. He sanctified them and he cleansed her, that he might present her, in verse 27, to himself, a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So my question was, why did the church need to be holy and spotless, without wrinkle or blemish? What reasons might there be for that? Yeah.
And following Jesus' example.
There you go. Okay, again, we're following Jesus' example, and by doing that, we're appearing to the world. We're Christ's presence in the world today. So we can't afford to have any blemishes or wrinkles or any spots that would detract people from Christ. We want them to understand who Christ is. So that's the importance of the church. That's why he gives advice to all these churches. He wants them to be spotless, to be wrinkle-free, without any blemishes. He wants them, because they're following Christ, to use his example, but also to make sure that the world sees that in them, that sees Christ through them. And so he ends with, so husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Okay, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. The idea that in what ways does the husband's love for his wife demonstrate that he loves himself? There's a good question. In what ways can you think of does the husband's love for his wife demonstrates that he loves himself?
Takes care of himself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hurt myself. Surely not going to.
Okay, there you go. Okay, right.
What did he say? What did he say?
Oh, he's not going to hurt himself, so he's certainly not going to hurt his wife. Okay, that's part of the. We're not into self-mutilation, so we don't want to cause any harm to anyone else, especially our wives. And Paul just continues that idea to kind of explain that. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. So what he's saying in part is that in the same way, hating or hurting one's wife damages oneself. So we're to take care of each other. Okay, it would be improper, and it would cause a lot more damage to in a relationship to hurt another person. Okay, and then he concludes in verse 30: "For we are members of his body, his flesh, and his bones." We are members of his body, of his flesh, and his bones. Why does Paul remind us that we are members of his body, his flesh, and his bones? Why does he want us to remember that?
Kind of remember his crucifixion.
Okay.
He died on the cross, and his bones were all out of joint.
Okay. But we are his flesh and his bones, and we are members of his body.
We were born in his image.
Okay, we were born in his image.
Like the scripture says, if one hurts, everybody hurts, or
Okay, that's true too. That's right. When I hurt my arm today, the rest of my body feels it. It's not just limited to here. So that's part of that as well. But again, the idea is that as the church, we are the visible presentation of Christ on this earth. So we have to remember that. We are his flesh and his bones. We're the part that the rest of the world sees. So we want to make sure that what they see is the right image. And then he gives the quote from Genesis chapter 2: "For this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." The idea that there's a creation of something that's new between the husband and the wife. They create a family. Now, I'll be the first to say that when we were first married, we lived with Celia's dad for 3 years. Okay, we weren't physically apart, but our relationship was different from any other relationship she had or I had. Okay, it was different. We formed our own family. It's sort of socially represented in the fact that when we were married, Celia changed her last name to my last name. Okay, now, yeah, shucks again, but she, and there was some discussion at the time. Well, should I change my last name to hers? Because legally that's possible. But I believe at the time there were a couple other Rick Rioptas and we didn't want to confuse anyone. So we just went ahead and did the traditional thing. Now, there's nothing in the Bible that says that has to be done, but it's just a kind of a symbolic way in which now we're the Richard W. Stengel II family, us, and that there's no other one. If we have children, they'd be part of that family, but it's just, this is us. We're new in the world. It's a completely unique system. And so he's saying in the church here, it's the same thing with the church. It reveals the idea that the church, when we leave the world and are joined with Christ through baptism, we're in a completely new relationship, a unique relationship. And we need to remember that as well. So I think that's what Paul is saying here. He says in verse 32, as I mentioned, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So we talked about the fact that how is marriage like Christ and the church. He continues on, nevertheless, keep in mind that he is talking about Christ and the church. So that, nevertheless, each one of you in particular should so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her own husband. Love his own wife. The idea that to make her a part of his thoughts, his actions, and his purposes, and regard her comfort and her happiness as much as he does his own. That's something that, if we didn't really study this and we just read the verses, the husband would walk away saying, see, that's why you do everything I tell you to do, and you obey me. But that's not what Paul's trying to get across. He's trying to tell the husbands to make sure that she's a part of, when he makes choices and has actions and proposes things, makes plans, that he has a regard for her comfort and her happiness as much as he does his own. So I think that's one of the keys that Paul's talking about. And as the wife, to see that she respects her husband, that she within her produces a care to please him and to fear to give offense. Not to fear the husband personally, but to be so much in love that she doesn't want to offend him or doesn't want to do something that would hurt him. Yeah. In the same way as we view God, we're in that kind of relationship with him, with Jesus. Jesus is the head of the church. We don't want to do things that are going to give offense to him or bring offense to the church. And that's one of the things that Paul is talking about in this section. So I don't want any of us leaving here or turning off the program to thinking that husbands have the right to dominate their wives just for their own pleasure. That's not what Paul is talking about. Mike, you had your hand raised?
Yeah. So this scripture talks about the mystery. So we studied the mystery before, that the Gentiles were going to be included in the plan of salvation.
Right.
But this is a whole nother mystery.
Right.
So we got to study that. We got to show ourselves approved, but study that. This relationship between a man and a woman, or a husband and a wife,
Right.
like Christ in a church, that relationship was kind of foreign to them in the Old Testament, right? Because they had disagreements,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
God didn't set any kind of testament for divorce. Moses
Right.
is the one that said, okay.
Right. That's exactly right. And this is a topic worth studying. And if I wanted to, we could expand this class to go into that in more detail. But I'd rather, at this time, I want to get through Ephesians. And then we can, if you want to go back, we can have a study on this right now. But in case you're interested in one more information, Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. The whole chapter is about the marriage relationship and marriage expectations. And that's also a very useful text to go to, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I believe in Colossians chapter 3, he makes some mentions of this as well. So if you want to get ahead of us, or you want to know more about this and investigate it, go to those sections in the Bible. Any last questions about this particular topic about the wives and husbands or Christ and the church? Okay, so that ends chapter 5, and we've got a little bit more time, so we're going to take the first part of chapter 6. Joanne, could you read chapter 6 of Ephesians, verses 1 through 4?
Yes. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord.
Okay, so I love the way Paul does this because he looks at both sides of the relationship. And he doesn't just, he talks about he starts with the wives, but he also includes the instructions of the husband as well. In this, he talks about your children and about parents and their expectations and again talking about the relationship let's see, I'm going to go all the way back in the Old Testament to look at the expectations of the children under the law in Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 18 through 21. Deuteronomy 21 verses 18 through 21. And this is kind of interesting. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they were chastened him, will not heed him, then the father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Wow. That's one of the reasons I'm glad I was born this side of the cross. Okay, so because I wasn't necessarily a good kid when I was growing up, and there were some points in my growing up, in my youth, that I could have been considered rebellious. So I'm glad they didn't live by this law back then. But the idea is there are expectations for children under the law. In fact, in verse 1, back in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, he says, children, obey your parents. Okay, but it doesn't stop there. He says, in the Lord. And I'm wondering how the phrase in the Lord modifies or changes the expectations. What does it change the meaning of this? Does that mean I have to just, as when my parents tell me something, I have to totally obey it and not question them at all? Or because this, we're living in an age where children are starting to question. Or maybe that's just a natural part of their development, as children question their parents. And so when Paul says, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, what is he saying?
Train them in the Lord.
Okay. Train them in the Lord.
Sing and read scripture and,
Okay.
encourage them to have companions that are friends that are believers.
Very good, very good. There's some expectations. You have to know what the Lord wants. So it's important for the parents to train them. And we can look in Exodus, and there's a lot of instructions for parents about teaching children about the scriptures and about the laws and how much they need to do that. So the idea that in the Lord, whatever can be done to the parents you should do it without violating the law of God, because this is right. And this is another one of those occasions that, realizing that even when parents do or seem to ask things that don't match up with our expectations, doing it is probably a good idea, because it's, besides you doing it from love and respect for them, you're doing because it's expected from God. You're being obedient because it's expected by God. And that's what's right. when he says, for this is right, or this is good, it's something that should be expected. And granted, depending upon the level or the age level and understanding of the young person, that might be hard for them to understand why they need to obey, but it is right to do this in the Lord. In verse 2, he says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Now, a commandment with a promise is something that has a positive consequence. Now, by the way, of the 10 commandments, there are only 2 commandments that don't have thou shalt not. And one of them is honor your father and mother. Any of you know what the other one is?
Out of the whole 10?
Out of the whole 10, there's only 2 commandments that don't say thou shalt not. One of them is honor your father and your mother.
Shall not take the Lord's name in vain or something?
No, it's no. This is just a tidbit of trivia, but it's remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So, but all the rest of the commandments have this negative connotation. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not have any other God before me, thou shalt not use the Lord name, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery. All of those, except the one with the promise that if you obey your parents, that if you honor your father and your mother, and then verse 3, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. There's the promise of honoring your father and mother. How does this particular blessing result from the commandment? How do you live well because you've honored your father and mother? Well, the idea is that obedience learned in your youth can help develop you in certain ways. It can help develop self-control, because when you're obeying somebody, you're putting them first, or their expectations or their wishes before your own. So you're learning to control yourself. Okay, it's not what I want, it's what they want. You're developing self-respect. You're developing diligence. You're developing respect for others. You're developing kindness. All of those things that come from obedience can lead to happiness and longer life. So it's a kind of, this is one of those promises that God was trying to make it clear that the relationship between parents and children, for children anyway, you want to learn to serve your parents. They're taking care of you, but someday you're going to have to take care of them. And someday your children, looking way down the line, are going to have to learn obedience from you. So you have to be a role model as well. And then in verse 4, he finishes this section, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in training and admonition. I don't know what some of the other versions say, but it says, do not provoke. Any of you know what provoke means?
Hang on.
Okay, basically to stir up something on purpose, to incite, to cause confusion or to cause pain. The idea that to provoke something means you started it. What you did caused them to react that way. So he's telling the fathers to be very careful that they don't, incite their children to anger or to wrath. The idea that excessive severity provokes rebellion. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so when you discipline in I guess a Christ-like manner. I mean, the discipline got to be consistent. But if you're all over the place,
right,
then the child is going to get confused anyway,
right? I mean, for years I grew up hearing, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you, and I could never understand what that meant. No, because I was the one getting the swats or whatever, getting disciplined. But now I realize that my mom and dad didn't want to cause me pain. but it was necessary. It was important that I be taught lessons and expectations, and those were fairly successful lessons for me so that I wouldn't do the same thing, or I would try not to do the same thing over again the wrong way. The idea that training and admonition in the Lord, just wanted to bring that up quickly because it related to something that Joanne was saying. You need to teach them the Lord's way. And that's been talked about in many different passages. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 6, back in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. And even in 2 Timothy chapter 3, when Paul's talking to Timothy about how he was brought up by his mother and his grandmother, and by word and by example, he learned the true way by the scriptures. He learned from his youth what those scriptures said and what they meant. So this relationship between parents and children is an important part of understanding the kind of ways that you're to submit to one another. Parents submit by not being overbearing on their children. Children submit by obeying their parents. But it's something that you have to have both sides working at the same time for it to be successful. So, any last questions about that? I think maybe we'll stop there for tonight and get to the third section on, we'll cover that next week. Your homework for next week is then to finish the book of Ephesians, to finish chapter 6. There's a lot of good things left to talk about. So, well, if there's nothing else, traditionally we offer an invitation for those who choose to commit themselves to Christ, to follow Him. Hopefully what we've been talking tonight is a really good lead into that. The idea that if you want to please God, you need to submit yourself to Him, to His Son. You need to, and that comes from hearing the Word and believing it. It comes from repenting of this idea that I can make my own choices, and then saying, I choose to follow God instead of I choose to please myself. It comes to confessing that you need Jesus Christ as Lord, and then being baptized. That point where your old self dies and your new self in Christ comes into life. But it's not only that for those of us who are in this room listening. I know we've all been baptized, and those of you who are listening too, some of you may have been. It's also the idea that you have to live faithfully for the rest of your life if you want to please God. It's not just a one-time and done thing. Christianity is a lifelong experience. An eternal experience, as it turns out. If you want to make that choice to follow Christ, now's the time. If you have already made that choice, become a Christian, but you're having trouble submitting or having trouble staying focused on God, now's a good time to make that change. If you have another need for which this congregation can help, let us know as we stand and sing the invitation song.
Number 529.